Welcome to Postum SDA Cast. Join Julian and Megan as they dive into history, theology, politics, and the future of Seventh-day Adventism. Thinking outside the box and brewing bold conversations. Let's sip, chat, and explore.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something pretty interesting. It's a belief held by Seventh-day Adventists, and it has to do with a prediction of a future Sunday law.
Okay.
You might find this fascinating, even if you're not an Adventist. Imagine a world where Sunday worship is enforced all over the globe,
Wow.
and those who don't comply face persecution. That's what this belief is about. And it's really interesting when you think about where it came from. It originated in a very different world than we live in now, and it persists even today. It makes you wonder why.
Yeah, it is fascinating how beliefs can stick around even when the world around them changes so much. What's really interesting here is that the Sunday law belief isn't just some side note for Adventists. It's tied into their identity and mission. It influences how they see themselves and interact with other faiths. It's a pretty big deal.
Okay, so before we get into all that, can you give us some background on where this Sunday law belief came from? Like, how did it even start?
Well, it goes way back to the mid-1800s, to a movement called the Millerites. They were totally convinced the world was about to end.
Oh, wow.
And you can probably imagine the huge disappointment when it didn't.
Yeah, I bet that was a major letdown.
It was. Out of that experience, the Seventh-day Adventist Church came about. And one of the most important figures in all this was Ellen G. White. She had visions, and she wrote a lot about end-time events, including this future Sunday law.
I've heard of her.
She wrote a book called The Great Conflict. It was published in 1888.
Okay.
And in it, she really paints a picture of this whole scenario.
Wait, 1888? Wasn't that the same time when a U.S. senator actually tried to make a law about Sunday worship?
It was. Senator Henry Blair introduced a national Sunday law bill that exact same year.
Wow.
I bet that seemed like a big confirmation of White's prophecies for those early Adventists. The timing is pretty strange.
I wonder if people back then pointed to it as proof. Like, see, we told you so.
Oh, definitely. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And this belief didn't just go away. The Sunday law kept showing up in Adventist literature and in their evangelism all throughout the 20th century.
Right. But when you think about all the changes that happened in the world during the 20th century, the world wars, the Cold War, globalization, how did Adventists make sense of this Sunday law belief when so much was changing around them? It must have been hard to hold on to.
They did adapt their interpretations. For example, during the Cold War, some Adventists connected the Sunday law with, get this, communism. Because communism was officially atheist, right, and often against religion. They saw it, maybe in a twisted way, as a potential tool to force Sunday worship on everyone.
That's a really interesting connection. So they thought the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I see how they would have come to that. Okay, but now fast forward to today. It's the 21st century. The world is totally different.
Yeah.
There's so much religious and political diversity around that trying to force everyone to follow one global worship system seems kind of impossible, right?
That's a good point.
It just doesn't seem realistic.
Yeah, you're right to question that. Think about how connected we are today. Everyone is on the internet, social media. I just don't see how a law like that could be put in place without huge pushback from all over.
Not to mention all the practical challenges. We have financial markets that operate 24/7, essential services going all the time, and so many countries are becoming more secular. It seems like a universal day of rest, especially one connected to a particular religion, would just cause chaos.
Exactly. You're getting at some key issues here. To have a Sunday law on that scale, you would need every country in the world to give up their sovereignty, to basically say, okay, we'll do what you say.
Yeah.
And in today's world, with all the complex relationships between countries, well, that just doesn't seem likely at all.
So if a global Sunday law seems really unlikely from both practical and political standpoints, why do so many Adventists still believe in it? What keeps that belief going?
That's where things get even more interesting. To understand it, we have to dig into the psychology of belief, how our minds work when it comes to what we believe.
Okay.
There are some powerful mental processes at play that can explain why people keep believing things, even when those beliefs seem to clash with the world around them.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's talk about that.
Great. Well, one of the biggest things is something called confirmation bias. Have you ever heard of that?
I think so.
It's this human tendency, it's like built into us to pay more attention to information that supports what we already believe. And at the same time, we kind of ignore or downplay anything that goes against those beliefs.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's like when you get a new car and then you see that same car everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Or when you're worried that something bad's going to happen and you start thinking every little thing is a sign.
Exactly. And with the Sunday law thing, it means that some Adventists, when they see what's going on in the world, they might see proof of the prophecy coming true, even in things like natural disasters or political stuff.
Really?
Yeah, they might focus on news stories or things politicians say that seem to line up with what they're expecting, but they don't pay as much attention to information that suggests otherwise.
That's interesting. A little scary, to be honest. But I think we all do that to some extent, right? Like, we all have those biases. So how do we become more aware of it? Especially when it comes to things we really believe in.
That's a great question. It's something we should all be thinking about, for sure. It takes effort, you know. We have to try to look at things from different angles, be open to hearing things that challenge our views, and sometimes even be willing to admit that we might be wrong.
That's harder than it sounds. So what other psychological stuff is going on here?
Another big factor is something called group identity. You know how we see ourselves as part of a group? For a lot of Adventists, believing in the Sunday law isn't just an idea, it's part of who they are. It's a core part of their Adventist identity, something that separates them from other Christian groups.
So it's kind of like a badge of honor. Like, it shows they have this unique understanding of prophecy and a special role to play in the end times.
You got it. Adventists often view themselves as a remnant church. It's like a small group of faithful people who are chosen to stand up for God's law even when others persecute them. And the Sunday law belief really reinforces that view, making them feel like they belong and have a purpose.
It's not just the belief itself, then. It's about the community and the sense of belonging that comes with it. It's about feeling like you're part of something big, something important.
Exactly. And it's that combination of confirmation bias and the whole group identity thing that helps explain why this belief stays strong, even when we see a world that seems less and less likely to actually force a law like that on everyone.
Okay, so we've got this really interesting situation. There's this historically rooted belief, but the realities of the modern world make it seem unlikely. And then there are these psychological factors that help explain why people hold on to it. But what are the real effects of this belief on Adventists? Like, how does it impact their daily lives, their interactions with others, and how they see their purpose in the world?
Well, it has both good and bad sides. We've talked about some of the positives, like the feeling of purpose and belonging it gives people. It's motivating, you know, knowing that you're part of a group that has a special mission that's getting ready for something big in the future.
Yeah, it's like everyone is working together towards a common goal.
Exactly. And that sense of purpose often leads to real action. Adventists are really known for their work in health, education, and social justice. They see all those things as part of preparing the world for Christ's return.
So the belief in a future Sunday law, even though it's about potential persecution, it can actually motivate people to do good in the present. That's kind of cool. But you said there are some downsides too, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. One of the negative aspects is that this whole idea of facing persecution, of waiting for the world to turn against you, it can make people withdraw from society. It's hard to really engage with the world when you're always on guard expecting trouble.
I get it. It's like building walls instead of bridges. And that makes it harder to connect with others, especially people from other faiths.
And that leads to one of the most interesting contradictions in the whole Sunday law thing, the tension it causes when Adventists advocate for religious freedom.
Okay, now that is ironic. So help me understand this. How can a group that believes they'll be persecuted for their beliefs also be so passionate about religious freedom for everyone?
It's a real paradox. On the one hand, Adventists have a long history of fighting for religious liberty, not just for themselves, but for everyone. They really get how important it is to practice your faith without being oppressed. But on the other hand, they're also convinced that this very freedom they're defending will eventually be taken away. That eventually their own right to worship on the Sabbath will be under threat.
It sounds like they're fighting for a principle that they believe will be used against them in the end. That's got to be a tough spot to be in.
It definitely creates some tricky situations. For example, how can you have a genuine conversation with other faiths when you believe they might turn on you one day? Or how do you join groups that are all about Christian unity when you see those groups as maybe leading towards the very thing you're afraid of?
Those are tough questions. So are there any examples of how these tensions actually play out in the lives of Adventists? Like, how does it affect their decisions and actions in the real world.
Yeah, there are definitely some real-world situations where you can see those tensions. Like take the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. You remember all the lockdowns and restrictions they had, even on religious gatherings?
Oh, yeah.
Well, some Adventists saw those measures as kind of a preview of how the Sunday law might be enforced, like a test run. Yeah. Some of them thought going along with those lockdowns was like practicing for when they might have to submit to this future Sunday law, and then others thought resisting those rules was important, like standing up against what they saw as religious oppression creeping in.
Wow, that's a really powerful example of how this one belief can color people's whole perspective.
It's amazing how something like a pandemic, something that most people wouldn't automatically link to a prophecy from the 1800s, can be seen through that lens. Are there any other examples of this kind of push and pull, this advocating for religious freedom but also expecting persecution?
Sure. Another example is how Adventists approach those groups that are trying to bring different Christian denominations together. You know, those ecumenical movements?
Oh, yeah.
Adventists usually support the idea of different faiths talking to each other, but their Sunday law belief makes them a little cautious about getting too close to these organizations. They worry that these groups might be leading everyone towards a single, unified religion, which is what they fear. I see. So it's a balancing act. They want to be involved, but they're also holding back a little because of this deep-seated belief in a future conflict. It's a lot to navigate.
It is. It's this constant tension between engaging with the world and kind of pulling away from it. And that shapes so much of how Adventists experience the world today.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've looked at the history behind the Sunday law belief, the psychology that keeps it going, and the impact it has on the Adventist community, both good and bad. It's complicated. So where do we go from here? How can people work through these seemingly opposite ideas?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think it's something that individual Adventists and the whole Adventist church are really grappling with right now. How can you hold on to a belief that seems less and less likely to happen as time goes on?
Right.
How do you balance faith and reason when the world around you is changing so much?
That's a question we all face, not just Adventists. How do we make sense of what we believe when the world keeps throwing new things at us? What are some ways people are trying to find that balance?
Well, one way is to take another look at the traditional interpretation of this Sunday law prophecy and maybe even reinterpret it. Some Adventist scholars are doing that right now.
Okay.
They're going back to the Bible, looking at it with a fresh perspective and thinking about alternative interpretations that might fit better with what we see happening in the world today.
So it's kind of like updating your beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Making sure they're still working in a world that's very different from when those beliefs first came about.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense that how we understand prophecies should change as the world changes. Like any kind of knowledge, it can grow and evolve.
That makes sense. What else are people doing?
Another approach is to shift the focus a bit. Instead of getting caught up in the details of the Sunday law itself, focus on the bigger principles behind it. The idea of standing up for your beliefs, even when you're under pressure, defending religious freedom for everyone, living a life of integrity and faith.
Right.
These are powerful ideas that can inspire you, regardless of how the prophecy itself might actually play out.
So it's about figuring out the deeper meaning behind the belief, the core values that are timeless, and letting those guide you, instead of getting stuck on a literal interpretation that might be more symbolic than anything.
Exactly. And I think that can be a really empowering way to deal with any belief that seems to clash with the world around you. Focus on the why behind it, not just the what.
I love that. Are there any other ways people are approaching this?
Of course, some people choose to hold on to the traditional belief, the whole thing, and accept that there might be some inconsistencies between what they believe and what they see in the world. For some people, the comfort and certainty that comes with their beliefs is more important than those inconsistencies.
Right. It's about figuring out what works for you, what lets you live a meaningful life, even if that means accepting some things that don't seem to perfectly fit together.
Exactly. And I think the key is to be honest with yourself as you work through these questions and to be willing to really think things through.
That's so important.
And one last thing I think is important to remember is that salvation is found in our personal relationship with Jesus, not in following rules about a specific day of worship.
That's a great point to end on. So for everyone out there who's wrestling with questions about faith, prophecy, and how to make sense of it all in this constantly changing world, remember this. It's okay to question, it's okay to doubt, and it's okay to re-examine what you believe. Searching for truth is a journey, not a destination. We'll leave you with that to think about. And that's your deep dive.
You've been listening to Postum SDA Cast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Don't forget to check out our other episodes, and we'll see you next time for more bold takes and fresh perspectives.